She tore my portfolio in half, then in half again, 4 clean pieces, unhurried, the way you have a letter you have already finished reading. And she did it in front of the entire Monday Review, the long glass table where Meridian decided each season which of us would be allowed to exist. I was 26, 3 weeks into the atelier, still learning where the good scissors lived. The woman doing the tearing was Sabine Laurent, editor-in-chief and creative director, the alpha the whole building called the Frost. And she did not raise her voice, because she never raised her voice. She squared the 4 pieces into a neat stack with one finger, the way you tidy a thing you are done with, and she looked at me over the top of her tortoiseshell reading glasses and said one word: again. That was all. Again. I went home to a county cheap dinner and cried into it and swore on my grandmother's shears that I would never forgive her.
Welcome, everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel!
I did not know she had kept one of the pieces. I did not know that word would turn out to be the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. It took me 8 months and a runway to learn the difference. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me back up, because a word is only a wound if you know the hand that cut it first. My name is Nell Beckett. I was 26 that spring, Milltown born, the kind of girl who learned to sew before she learned to be quiet, and then learned to be quiet anyway. I have auburn hair I never quite tame, and green eyes, and a scatter of freckles my grandmother used to call my basting stitches, because they looked, she said, like a seam laid down loose before the real one. I am not showy. I do not turn a room. What I have is a pair of hands that have never once lied to me, and a thing I can do that I have never had a good word for. I can read cloth. I can put my palm flat on a bolt of wool and tell you which way it wants to fall. I can look at a finished seam and tell you the mood of the woman who sewed it, whether she was rushed, whether she was loved, whether she stopped for something and came back. Cloth is honest. It keeps the shape of the hand that cut it. I built my whole life on that one plain fact, and I was right about it, which is more than I can say for almost everything else I believed at 26. The hands were my grandmother's before they were mine. She raised me over a sewing machine in a town the maps had mostly given up on, and she gave me 2 things worth having: the trade and a pair of bone-handled tailor's shears older than either of us, worn smooth and pale as a river stone at the grip, that cut through 4 layers of melton like they were parting water. Keep your shears sharp and your word sharper, she told me. And she meant it as one sentence. That spring, she was 2 hours north in a care home with pale green walls, and the trouble we had all been dreading finally had a name, which was that she was forgetting mine. Some days I was Nell. Some days I was her own sister, dead 40 years. The home was good and the home was expensive. And the reason I could keep her in it was that I had a real job at last, a junior hands job, at the one house in the world she had taught me to say the name of like a prayer, Meridian. I did not come to the city to be a star. I came so my grandmother could keep her window and her good chair. Everything I did that year, I did with her shears in my bag and her voice going quiet in my ear. Meridian, if you have never had reason to know it, is not only a magazine and not only a house. It is both, folded into one gray stone building with 100 years of ghosts in the walls, the glossy pages the whole city pretended not to read on the train. And behind them, up a service stair most of the staff never climbed, the atelier where the clothes on those pages were actually made. Meridian made careers, and Meridian ended them, sometimes in the same September, and it did both with the same flat elegance, the way a good pair of shears does not distinguish between the thread it is meant to cut and the finger that gets in the way. I worked in the atelier on the 5th floor, at a table under a tall north window, because north light does not flatter and does not lie, and a seamstress who lets herself be flattered by her light will hang a hem crooked and never know. That window was mine. It was the first thing in the city that felt like it belonged to me. I used to get there at 6 to have it to myself before the others came. The whole gray room quiet and the light coming in even and cold and true. And for 1 hour a day, I was exactly where my grandmother had always said I would end up. The atelier had a queen, and she was not Sabine Laurent. She was Magda, première main, head of the workroom, 40 years at Meridian. A small iron woman with reading glasses on a chain, and pins bristling from her cuff like she was born with them. Magda had dressed 3 generations of the city's brides and buried 2 husbands, and did not think much of anyone under 50. And on my second day, she watched me pad stitch a lapel without being asked, and said only, which I later learned was the warmest word in her vocabulary. She dresses the truth, Nell, she told me once, tipping her head up at the ceiling, at the floors above us where the editors lived. Up there, they dress the story. Down here, we dress the truth. Don't confuse the two and don't let them confuse you. Magda saw everything in that room. She was the one who told me, months later, the thing that changed how I understood every cruel moment that came before it. But that spring she just watched and said, and let me keep my window. And there was one more soul on my side, though side is a strong word for a 19-year-old intern who could not keep a secret to save her life. Tavi, bright, breathless, disastrous. On a 1-season internship, she was going to turn into a life or die trying, and she attached herself to me the first week for reasons I never understood. Unless it was that I was the only person in the building who answered her questions. Tavi believed in me the loud, embarrassing way you can only believe in someone when you are 19 and have not yet learned what it costs. She had seen the sketchbook I kept for myself, the one I worked in at night after the good work was done, the designs that were mine and no one's, and she had decided without asking me that the world needed to see them. Remember that. When I tell you how the portfolio ended up on that glass table, remember that it got there on love. The reckless kind, the kind that hands a thing you made to the exact wrong person because it cannot stand to watch you hide. Sabine Laurent, I knew the way you know weather before you know a person. She was the barometric pressure of that building. You felt her before you saw her. The room going a half degree cooler and more correct. Everyone's spines finding an extra inch, the light itself seeming to sharpen. She had been running Meridian for 11 years, since she was younger than anyone that powerful is supposed to be, and the house had done, in that decade, the one thing houses like it almost never do, which is get better. They called her the Frost, for the obvious reasons, and for one that took me longer to see. Jet black hair she wore scraped back so severely, it looked like a decision about the whole world. A platinum watch on her left wrist she never took off. Reading glasses, tortoiseshell, that she removed. I would learn to read this like scripture, only when she wanted to truly look at a thing instead of merely see it. And a scent, faint, that I caught the first time she passed my table without stopping. Cedar, and cold pressed linen, and underneath both of them something warm and metallic, like a coin held in a fist. I was an omega in a house full of alphas, and I had spent years training my own scent down to nothing. Disciplined to invisibility, hers I could not train myself to stop noticing. That was the first small betrayal of my body. There would be others. Here's the thing I did not know. The thing that would have changed how I stood in that room if I had known it, and could not have known it, because she had built it that way on purpose. Sabine Laurent already knew my hands, my little junior's job, the one keeping my grandmother's window. I had believed I earned it off a stack of anonymous applications and a good day at the trade test. I had not. Months before the atelier ever called me, my portfolio had crossed her desk in a pile of 200 others, and she had pulled it out, and she had kept it, and she had made one quiet call that turned it from a rejection into a start. She never told me. She told me nothing kind for a very long time. That was the whole architecture of it, the thing I could not see from inside. That the coldest woman in that building had been arranging my life from the shadows for the better part of a year, and had gone to some trouble to make sure I would never suspect it. Because in her world, the surest way to destroy a thing was to be seen to love it. But I am ahead of myself. Let me go back to the table, and the tearing, and the word. The Monday review was the atelier's weekly reckoning. The editors came down from their glass floors to the workroom to see what we had made, and to decide. And their deciding had the weight of tides. Ordinarily, a fifth-floor hand like me was furniture at that meeting. You stood against the wall. You held the toile up when told. You did not speak. So I was against the wall where I belonged when it happened. And the first I knew of it was Tavi's face, which had gone the specific white of a person who has just realized what she has done. She had put my private sketchbook, my designs, the Auburn and Oxblood collection I had never shown a living professional, the one I did for myself at my window before dawn, into the review pile. To help me. She had written my name on the front in her round, hopeful hand, and Sabine Laurent had just picked it up. She went through it slowly. That was the worst of it, that she did not glance and dismiss. She turned every page, and the room turned quiet the way it does when the tide is deciding. And I stood against the wall with my grandmother's shears in the bag at my feet and watched the most powerful woman in my world read the most honest thing I had ever made. She stopped on the fourth page, the coat, the one I was proudest of, the oxblood swing coat with the seam that ran on the bias so it moved like water. She took off her glasses. I did not yet know what that meant. I thought, God help me. For one whole second I thought, this is it. This is the morning my life turns. And then she put the glasses back on and she picked up the sketchbook in both hands and she tore it in half again, 4 pieces, and squared them and looked at me, the only time her eyes had ever found mine, and said, again. And I understood the room to be telling me that I was nothing, and I believed it, because I did not yet know how to read her the way I could read cloth. What I remember next, I remember in pieces, the way you remember the minutes after you burn your hand. Not the pain, which arrives later, but the strange bright clarity around it. Simone Vautier laughing. I will get to Simone. The sound of the 4 pieces being set down. Tavi crying without sound, both hands over her mouth. Magda not looking up from her pins, which I took then for indifference and understand now for mercy. Because Magda knew better than any of us what she had just watched, and was not going to let her face say so in that room. And Sabine already moving on, already asking the next editor about the coat linings, as though she had not just halved 8 years of a girl's life on a glass table and told her to do it over. I did not cry there, I want you to know that. Oh. I learned stillness in a mill town from a woman who is forgetting my name, and I stood against that wall with a torn-up life at my feet, and I did not give them a single tear. I saved those for the dinner I could not eat. Bodies are honest, but they can be disciplined. Mine has had a lot of practice. I almost quit that night. I want to be truthful about that, because the version where I was brave from the beginning is a lie, and I have promised you the honest one. I sat on the floor of my rented room with the 4 pieces of my sketchbook and my grandmother's shears in my lap, and I did the arithmetic of leaving, where I would go, what I would tell the care home, how far a junior hand's savings would stretch with no junior hand's job. And then I did the other arithmetic, the one that always won that year, which was my grandmother's window and her good chair and the pale green walls I was keeping her behind. I could not afford my pride, so I taped the 4 pieces back together, all 4, and I sat with the coat under my hands, the oxblood coat with the bias seam, and I realized something that kept me at Meridian when nothing else could have. The tear was clean. She had not crumpled it, had not thrown it. She had halved it exactly along the spine and then along the fold. 4 true pieces. The cut of someone who respected the paper even as she destroyed it. It did not make sense. A person who thought my work was nothing would not have been so careful with the ruin of it. I did not know what it meant. But I am a woman who reads the cut, and that cut was trying to tell me something, and I decided to stay long enough to learn what. I went back the next morning at 6 to my window because it was mine and because I did not know where else to put myself. And she was there. Sabine Laurent. In the workroom, before the workroom was awake, standing at my table under my north light with the oxblood coat's toile, the muslin practice version I had left on the stand, turned inside out in her hands. She was reading my seams. The way I read cloth, she was doing it, thumb moving along the inside of a seam allowance where no one but the maker is ever supposed to look, where the true work is, where you cannot hide a lazy stitch or a loved one. She did not startle when I came in. She set the toile down. She said, "You're early." I said, "So are you." And she looked at me for a long moment with the glasses off, and then she said the second thing she ever said to me, which was not an apology, and was somehow worse than one. "Show me your hands," she said. And when I held them out, not knowing why, she looked at them the way she had looked at the coat, and something moved at the corner of her jaw. One small muscle, there, and gone. Then she pressed her thumb flat against the face of her watch, a gesture I would come to know better than my own heartbeat, and she said, "You'll work upstairs now, where I can see them." And she left. And I stood in my own light not knowing whether I had been rescued or captured, which, it turned out, was the correct thing not to know. "Show me." 2 words. She would say them to me 100 times over the next 8 months, and they never once stopped doing something to the back of my neck. That first morning, I thought they were a demand, the frost inspecting her tools. It took me a long time to hear them the other way, that in a life built entirely on never being caught wanting anything, show me was the only permission she knew how to give herself to look. But I am doing it again, running ahead. That morning, all I knew was that I had been reassigned, without asking, out of the honest 5th floor workroom, and up into the glass floors where the story got dressed instead of the truth, to be the personal hand of the woman who had torn my life in 4 the day before. I called my grandmother that night. She thought I was her sister. I told her sister's name that the girl I was worried about had gotten a promotion of a kind. "Good," my grandmother said, from behind her failing memory, in the one clear voice she had left. "Then don't let them make her small." I did not know yet that the woman I needed protecting from was the same woman doing the protecting. Nobody in this story knew the whole of it but Magda, and Magda was waiting, the way she waited on a hem for the right moment to say the true thing. They gave me a corner of the design floor, a fitting room and a work table outside Sabine's office, and a title so junior it was barely a word, and Simone Vaultier decided within the hour that I was going to be her entertainment for the season. You should know about Simone. She was an alpha and an heir. The Vaultier name is on a conglomerate that owns half the houses Meridian competes with, and Simone had been installed at Meridian as a contributing editor, the way you install a listening device, to watch and to be near Sabine, because their mothers had decided some time ago that the 2 great houses should stop competing and start marrying. Simone was beautiful in the expensive way, the way that costs other people something. And she took one look at me, county-born, freckled, wearing the same 2 good jackets in rotation, and understood exactly what I was, and exactly how to use me. The atelier's little pet, she called me, loud, in front of the room, that first afternoon. Sabine's rescued stray. Does it do tricks, or just sew? And Sabine, at her desk, 10 feet away, did not look up, did not defend me, said nothing at all. I filed that with the tearing. Another cruelty. I was building quite a case against her. I had no idea I was building it out of the wrong evidence. I set my 1 term that first week, and I said it to her face, which I think surprised us both. She had corrected a jacket I'd fitted, sent it back with a mark from that red grease pencil she used. A single slashing line down a sleeve seam that was, I saw when I looked, entirely correct. The sleeve did hang wrong, and her eye had caught what mine had missed. And she said, across the work table, "Again." And something in me that had taped 4 pieces of paper back together stood up. "I'll do the work," I said. "I'll do it as many times as it takes, and I'll do it better than anyone in this building. But I won't thank you for tearing it up. And I won't pretend that was teaching. That was cruelty, and we both know the difference." She went very still. The whole floor went still with her, because no one spoke to the frost that way and kept their corner. She took off her glasses. She looked at me for a long moment, and I braced to be fired. And instead she said quietly, "The strangest thing." "Good," she said. "Don't ever thank me for it." And she put her glasses back on and went back to her pages. And I stood there with my heart going like a machine, having won something I did not understand the shape of. Correctness, she told me weeks later, is not the same as kindness. I have only ever been able to afford one of them. Remember, she said that. It is the closest she came for a long time to telling me everything. The first weeks upstairs passed in a strange suspended weather. A house being run by a woman I now saw all day and understood not at all. She worked the way water works on stone, without hurry and without stopping, and she folded me into that work the way you fold a new tool into a hand, testing it, wearing it in. I fitted, I recut. I stood in the fitting room for hours while she circled a garment on the stand and found always the one seam that was a degree less than true. And she said, again, and I did it again. And here is the thing that undid my whole case against her. She was right. Every time. The sleeve did hang wrong. The bias did want another ½ inch. The mark from her red grease pencil, that single slashing line she left on my work like a wound, was never once cruelty dressed as instruction. It was the instruction. She was teaching me the way my grandmother had, without softness, without praise, by refusing to let a wrong seam live. Except my grandmother had loved me out loud, and this woman gave me nothing but the correction. And I was learning more from her cold than I had ever learned from anyone's warmth. I hated that I was learning. I could not make myself stop. I started to get better in a way I could feel. That is a rare thing, to feel your own hands changing under you. And it is addictive, and she knew it was, and she doled it out like a woman who understood exactly what she was building. By the 3rd week, the garments I fitted came back with fewer red lines. By the 5th, some came back with none, just set on the stand where I would see them, unmarked, which from her was a standing ovation. She never said good. She said again less. I learned to read the shrinking of that word the way sailors read a barometer. And I lived, God help me, for the mornings when she set a finished thing down and did not say it at all. We were alone together more than either of us planned, because the design floor emptied at 7 and Sabine Laurent did not keep hours a human keeps. I stayed because the work was there, and the work was mine. And my window at 6 in the morning had become a work table at 10 at night. She stayed because I did not know why she stayed, to watch me, to not go home to whatever the top of that gray building held for her. And in those hours, in the blue quiet after the floor emptied, the frost did a thing I would not have believed if I had not been the one standing there. It thawed a 1/4 inch, enough to see there was a person under it. She was funny. That was the first crack in my case that I could not tape back together. In daylight, the frost said nothing that was not correct, but at 11 at night, both of us wrung out over a hem that would not sit. She was dry and exact and quietly savage about the whole industry we served. And once she said something about a rival house's spring collection, something about a woman drowning in ruffles as a cry for help. That made me laugh out loud, actually laugh, the sound too big for the quiet room. And she looked up from her pages surprised, and something crossed her face that I would spend weeks trying to name. It was not a smile. She did not smile. It was the look of a person who has said a true thing in the dark and been heard, and did not know until that second how long it had been. I stopped laughing. She went back to her pages. But the room was different after, warmer by that same 1/4 inch, and neither of us moved to leave for a long time. We had a rhythm to those nights I did not notice us building until it was built. I would put the kettle on around 10 because the floor's good coffee lived up here now, and I was not too proud to drink it. And I would make her a cup the way I had learned she took it without either of us ever discussing that I had learned it. Ruined, she called it, too much sugar, a thing she would have died before ordering in front of the daylight version of herself. She would let it go cold. Every time. I would make it and she would thank me with a nod that was not quite a nod, and set it at her elbow and forget it under the work. And an hour later I would take the cold cup away and she would look up, faintly betrayed, as though I had stolen something, and I would make her another, and she would let that one go cold too. It became a joke that we never said out loud. It became, if I am honest, a small marriage of its own, the making and the forgetting and the making again. And I have thought since that you can learn everything you need to know about whether two people will last, by whether one of them will keep making the coffee the other one is always going to let go cold. I kept making it. She always came back the next night to let it die again. That is a kind of promise if you know how to read it. One of those nights she told me a true thing without meaning to, the way she only ever told them. We were talking about a designer she had come up under, a great cold woman now dead, and I asked, carelessly, the wine of the late hour in it though there was no wine, whether anyone had ever been kind to her, actually kind, in this whole industry that ran on beautiful cruelty. She went still, not the working stillness, the other one. My grandmother, she said, finally. Meridian was hers before it was my mother's. She used to let me sit under her cutting table when I was small and hand her pins, and she called me clever where my mother could not hear, because my mother had decided early that clever was a thing you beat out of a girl before the world could use it against her. She was quiet a moment. My grandmother died when I was 9, and my mother spent the next 30 years teaching me that everything my grandmother told me was soft was a lie. She looked at her cold coffee. I'm very good at my job, Nell. I am the best in this building at exactly one thing, which is deciding what a thing is worth and never letting it see that I have decided. She did not look at me when she said the last part. It is a terrible skill to be the best at. I have only recently started to understand what it cost me. I began to test her, quietly, because I'm a woman who cannot leave a thing unread. I took a scrap idea, a nothing sample, a facing detail I would never have signed, and I put a signature into it that only I would know, a particular way of turning a corner that my grandmother had beaten into my hands and that no one else in that building sewed. A tell as unmistakable to me as a thumb pressed flat to a watch. And I let it go into the house's river of samples, and I waited to see where it surfaced. It surfaced 3 weeks later on the fall boards. Elevated, refined, the corner turned exactly the way I turn it, sitting in a Meridian look that the whole floor admired under no name at all. If she had been stealing from me, my corner would have been sanded off, made anonymous, made safe. Instead, it had been carried up into the light with my fingerprint intact and set where it could be seen and could not yet be traced. She was not taking my work. She was smuggling it past the guards. I stood at the fall boards looking at my own grandmother's corner turned up into the best house in the world, and I understood that I was being given something, patiently, in the dark, by a woman who had decided the only safe way to hand me a future was to make it look like the house had grown it by itself. Here is what I cataloged because I cannot help it, because I am my grandmother's granddaughter, and I read the small true things. The watch, platinum, on her left wrist, and the way she pressed her thumb flat against its face before every real decision, as if she were asking the time how long she had to keep being careful. The red grease pencil, which she held like a scalpel and never like a pen. The glasses coming off when she wanted to truly see. The specific red she reserved for Meridian's best work. A deep oxblood she mixed herself and let no supplier match. The same red, I realized with a jolt one night, as the coat in my torn-up sketchbook. The coffee she let go cold at her elbow, because the work took her under and she forgot it, exactly the way I forget mine. I cataloged her the way I catalog cloth, and every entry said the same impossible thing, that this woman was not what the building believed her to be, and that I was the only one in the room being allowed to find it out. Then there was the matter of the ghosts. I began to see my own work in the house, not obviously. Sabine Laurent did nothing obviously, but a sleeve I had drawn in my private book turned up on the fall boards under no one's name. The bias seam, my bias seam, the one from the coat she had torn, appeared in a Meridian sample that shipped to a buyer in the spring line. A color story I had scribbled at my window at dawn surfaced 3 weeks later in a mood the whole floor cooed over. At first I thought I was being robbed. I sat with that ugly thought for 2 whole days. The atelier's little pet whose ideas got quietly harvested by the house that owned her. And it fit the frost so well, the theft, that I almost let myself believe it. But the reads did not add up. A woman stealing my work would have buried the source. She was doing the opposite. She was seeding it piece by piece into 100 small places where it could take root and be seen and become undeniably part of Meridian before anyone thought to ask whose hand it came from. I did not understand it. It looked like theft and it moved like protection, and I had never in my life been protected by anyone who would not let me see them doing it. Why was she being kind to me in a language that looked exactly like cruelty? I turned the question over on the train, at my grandmother's bedside, at my window at 6. It made no sense, and things that make no sense to me itch until I solve them. And I could not solve this one because I was missing the one piece Magda had. So I did the thing I do. I watched. I watched the way she never let Simone Vautier's mockery of me land when Sabine could redirect it, always with work. A Kurt Vautier, the March boards, that pulled the knife out of the air before it reached me and disguised the pulling as impatience. I watched her keep me late on the nights I later learned her mother was in the building. I watched her arrange my days so that I was always, somehow, exactly where the powerful people of that house were least likely to notice me. And I, who wanted so badly to be noticed, took it for more evidence that she thought me small. I was reading the cloth right and the meaning wrong. It happens. The stitches are honest. The hand that laid them can still fool you, if it is skilled enough. And hers was the most skilled I have ever known. The night it began to turn, I had a bad call from the care home. My grandmother had had a frightened day, had not known where she was, had asked for a woman 30 years dead, and wept when no one could bring her. I took the call in the fitting room at 9 at night with my back to the door, and I did not cry because I had discipline, and then I cried anyway, quietly, the way you do when the discipline is just a dam, and the water finds the crack, and I did not hear the door. When I turned, she was there, Sabine, in the doorway, and I braced for the cold, for the frost to find her atelier hand leaking in a fitting room and file it under weakness. She did not. She came in, and she closed the door, so the floor would not see, and she did not ask me what was wrong, and she did not touch me, and she did not tell me it would be all right, because she was not a woman who lied even to be kind. She stood near me, close enough that I caught the cedar and cold linen of her, and she said quietly, "Breathe out, just that, breathe out." And I did, and she stood with me while I did it again, and when I was steady, she said, "Go home, Nell, the hem will be here tomorrow." She said my name, the whole of it, once, like punctuation. She had never said my name. I went home shaking for a reason that had nothing to do with grief. After that, we were careful. And being careful is its own kind of confession. Two people who are not careful do not need to be. We built a perimeter without ever naming it, a set of small distances we did not cross. She did not touch me, and I did not touch her. We stood on opposite sides of the work table. When she reached to mark a garment on me, she used the pencil, never her hand, the red tip hovering a disciplined inch off the cloth. We spoke of the work, and let the work carry everything the work is famous for carrying. And under all of it ran a current I had trained my whole Omega life to master, and could not master with her. The pull, the old chemistry, her scent, meaning safe to a nervous system that had never once been safe. My own settling when she was near the way it had never settled for anyone. I'm not going to pretend it was only the chemistry. The chemistry is just the reason your body notices. Why it stays is the person. I was staying for the person, the funny, exact, lonely person the building had never met. And I knew it. And I held the perimeter because she was my employer, and an alpha promised to a merger, and the whole world stood between us. And because some things you protect precisely by not reaching for them, Magda told me on a Thursday, over the good scissors, in the flat voice she used for the truest things. I had been complaining, carefully, because you did not complain about Sabine Laurent in that building, but Magda was safe, about the torn sketchbook, months gone now and still lodged in me like a pin. And Magda did not look up from the seam she was pressing, and she said, "She kept a piece of it, you know." I said, "What?" Magda said, "The paper. That day, 4 pieces, and she squared them. And when the room cleared, she put 3 in the bin and 1 in her coat. I saw her. 40 years I have watched that woman, Nell, and I am telling you a thing I have never once seen. She keeps nothing. Not a card, not a photograph, not a single soft object in that whole cold office upstairs. I have been in it. There is nothing of a person in it. It is a room dressed to say no one lives here. And she kept your paper. Magda set the iron down and finally looked at me, over her glasses. 40 years of that workroom in her face. Ask yourself, child, she said, not what she tore. Ask yourself what she kept. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my rented room with my grandmother's shears on the nightstand, and I ran the whole 8 weeks again with Magda's fact threaded through it, and it was like turning a garment inside out and finally seeing the seams. The true work, the loved work, the thing the outside is built to hide, the clean tear, the early morning at my table with the toil turned inside out in her hands, the corrections that made me better, the mockery she pulled the knife out of, the ghosts of my designs seeding the house, the nights she kept me exactly where the powerful were not looking. It did not look like protection because I had never been shown protection that had to disguise itself. But that is what it was. She had torn my book in front of that room, because a room like that, a house like that, a mother like the one I did not yet know she had, that world does not let you keep the thing you love. It takes it to use against you. And the only way Sabine Laurent had found, in a whole life built on that lesson, to keep a thing she had decided she wanted, was to be seen to destroy it. Again was never you failed. Again was keep going, I see you, said in the only language her mother could not overhear. I want to tell you I did something wise with that understanding. I did not. Understanding a thing and knowing what to do with it are 2 different rooms, and I stood in the first one for a long time, not daring the second. Because if Magda was right, then everything changed, and I was not ready for everything to change. It is one thing to be the wronged girl with the clean grudge. The grudge is warm, you can hold it. It is another thing to be a woman who is being loved badly and sideways and at great cost by someone who cannot say so. Because then you have to decide what you are going to do back. And doing something back was the most dangerous thing I could imagine. So I did nothing. I held the perimeter. I let again keep meaning 2 things at once. And I did not tell her I had learned the second one. And I watched her more closely now, with the truth in my hands. And every day it got harder to keep my side of the distance we had built. Because now when she pressed her thumb to her watch before a decision, I understood she was asking herself the same question I was asking myself, which was, how long can I keep being careful about this? Knowing made the perimeter harder, not easier, which is a thing no one warns you about. When I believed she was cruel, the distance between us was a wall, and you can rest against a wall. When I understood she was careful, the distance became a held breath, and you cannot rest against a held breath, you can only keep holding it. I cataloged my own restraint now the way I cataloged cloth, the times a day I did not reach across the work table, the particular effort of handing her the red grease pencil without letting my hand find hers on the way, the oxblood thread, the Meridian red, her red, my coat's red, the 3 of them the same red, which I had stopped being able to see as a coincidence, spooling between us on the table, like a thing that had already decided we were connected and was just waiting for us to admit it. I learned the exact distance at which her scent stopped being weather and started being a question. I stood a careful half-inch outside that distance for weeks. It was the hardest sewing I have ever done, and none of it was with my hands. And we were not, it turned out, the only 2 people counting the inches. Simone Vaultier had a gift too, a darker cousin of mine, where I read cloth, she read leverage, and she had begun to read the room the way I read a seam, and to see the true work under the made surface of it. She stopped mocking me around that time. That was how I knew to be afraid. The cruelty had been noise, and the noise stopped. And what replaced it was a quiet, watchful attention that followed me down corridors and sat 2 seats away in meetings and cataloged, I have no doubt, exactly the things I was cataloging. The coffee I made, the pencil I passed, the half-inch I kept, and the effort it cost me to keep it. Once I came out of the fitting room late and found her in the dim corridor, not startled, waiting, and she looked at me with those expensive eyes and said, very softly, "She tore your book up, you know, in front of all of us, and you make her coffee." She tilted her head. I wonder what a person would have to be promised to make coffee for the woman who did that. And she walked away before I could answer, which was mercy because I did not have an answer that was safe to say out loud. She had read it. She had read all of it. And a woman like Simone does not gather a thing she has read unless she intends eventually to use it. I should have told Sabine that Simone was watching. I have gone back over that 100 times. But telling her meant naming the thing between us out loud, meant saying there is a between us for Simone to watch, and we had spent 2 months not saying it, keeping it safe inside the not saying the way you keep a flame inside cupped hands. So I held that too. I added it to the perimeter. 1 more inch of distance, 1 more held breath. I will not even warn her, because warning her is confessing, and confessing is the one thing that gets us caught. It was the wrong call. Most of the careful things I did that year were the wrong call. I have made my peace with it, because the careful things were also the only things keeping the whole fragile arrangement standing, and you cannot know, in the middle of holding a thing up, which of your hands is the one that is also slowly crushing it. Simone kept watching. I kept my silence, and the flame in the cupped hands got hotter and closer to the skin, and neither of us moved, because we had both decided in our separate careful ways that being burned together was still better than the safe cold either of us had lived in before. The near thing happened on a night in the 8th week, and it is the closest we came before the end to crossing the line we had drawn. A late fitting, a gown for a client whose name kept the whole floor whispering, and it would not sit right across the back, and Sabine was on one side of it and I was on the other, and I reached to smooth the bias at the same moment she did, and our hands met on the cloth. That was all. 2 hands on muslin over a seam. Neither of us moved them. I could feel the cold of her watch against my wrist and the warmth of her under it, and I looked up and she was already looking at me with the glasses off, and the whole disciplined architecture of 8 weeks stood there between us and trembled. She could have closed it. I could have. For 1 long breath, the perimeter was a single inch of muslin, and 2 hands that had forgotten the work. Then she pressed her thumb to her watch. I felt it, the small decision, and she drew her hand back slowly, and she said in a voice with almost nothing left in it, "Not yet. Not yet. Not no." I heard the difference. I have made a life out of hearing the difference. And I went home that night knowing 2 things I could no longer unknow: that she wanted me, and that she was protecting me from something so large that even wanting me had to wait for it. What was she protecting me from? I had the shape of it by then, even if I did not have the name. Her mother, the merger, the whole machinery above us on the glass floors that had decided, long before I taped 4 pieces of paper together, what Sabine Laurent was for and who she would be given to. Simone Vaultier had stopped being merely cruel to me and started being watchful, which was worse, because cruelty is loud and watching is quiet, and the quiet ones are the ones you have to fear. She had begun to notice how often the Frost's little pet was in the room, and to file it the way I had filed the tearing, building her own case out of her own evidence toward her own ends. I did not know yet what those ends were. I knew only that the perimeter we had held for 8 weeks was not going to hold much longer, because perimeters are held by 2 people choosing distance, and a thing was coming that was going to take the choice away from us. It came on a Monday. Of course it came on a Monday. That house did all its worst business at the glass table where it had first torn me in 4. I had never met Constance Laurent, and I understood her in under a minute, the way you understand a cold front the second it walks through a door. Sabine's mother, the proprietor of Meridian, the woman whose grandmother's grandmother had founded it, who had run the house for 30 years before she handed the daylight of it to her daughter, and kept, always, the dark of it for herself. She was smaller than her reputation, and colder than her daughter, and where Sabine's stillness was a thing she chose, Constance's was simply what she was made of. Straight through, she came down to the glass floor that Monday with Simone Vaultier, a half step behind her, wearing the specific calm of a person whose knife has already found its mark. And I knew, watching them cross the room together, that the perimeter was over, and something worse than a torn book was about to happen at that table. Simone had done her arithmetic and done it well. She had figured out the thing the whole floor half knew and no one had said, that the season the buyers were losing their minds over, the collection that was going to make the show, was not coming from the editors on the glass floors. It was coming from a county girl at a fitting table who had been torn up in this very room 8 weeks before. And Simone had taken that truth to Constance, not as a wonder, but as a wound, the way only a certain kind of person can weaponize someone else's gift. Your celebrated season, she had said, in effect, is built in secret by a nobody you humiliated. If the press learns that Meridian's genius is a stray you tore up and hid, the story is not the close. The story is the lie. Plug the leak. Fire the girl. And let the credit and the Muse's place on that runway go to a name the house is not ashamed to marry. Simone did not want me gone because I was nothing. She wanted me gone because I was something, and the something was in her way. Constance did not raise her voice either. It is a family trait, the not raising. They have found that the world leans in closer for a whisper than it ever did for a shout. She stood at the glass table where my sketchbook had died, and she said to Sabine, as though I were already a settled matter and not standing 10 feet away, "The atelier girl goes. Today, quietly, with a good reference and a better severance, and no story. The show announces the Vaultier bond, Meridian and Vaultier, one house, the way it should have been a generation ago." She turned her head and looked at me then, once, the way you look at a chart that is not yours, filing me under someone else's problem. "She has done lovely work," Constance said, without warmth, the way you might compliment a machine before you sold it. But a house is not a person, and it cannot afford to love the wrong hands in public. Send her home. And she left, certain the way only the very powerful are certain, that the thing she had decided was already done. Sabine took me into her office and closed the door, and for the first time in 8 weeks, the perimeter was gone. Not crossed, but simply gone, burned off by the size of what was in the room. She stood with both hands flat on her cold desk, and her head down and her breathing wrong, and I recognized it, because I had stood exactly that way over 4 pieces of paper months before. "Break it or defend it," she said, not looking at me. "That is the whole of it, Nell. I can defend the structure, send you home with money, marry the merger, keep Meridian exactly as safe and exactly as dead as it has always been. Or I can break it, and I do not yet know what is on the other side of breaking it, except that it will not be safe, for the house or for you." She looked up. "Tell me what you want. For once in my life, I am going to do what someone else wants instead of what the house needs." And I understood that she was offering to burn it all down for me, and that I could not let her, because a love that costs the other person everything and calls it romance is just a prettier kind of taking. So I chose the harder road, the honest one, the one that did not put the whole price on her. "I'll go," I said. And her face did a thing I had never seen it do. So I said the rest fast, before either of us could mistake it for surrender. "Listen to me. I will not be the thing that ends you. If I stay and you break the merger for me, your mother wins anyway. She spends the rest of her life proving to you that love is the weakness she always said it was, and she uses me to do it. And I will not be her evidence. So I'll go, but not quietly and not the way she means. The work is mine, Sabine. Every seam this season the buyers are dying over came out of a book she tore up in this room. Keep my name off it if it keeps the house standing. I have kept a whole life off the record to keep a window in a care home. I know how to be no one. But do not let Simone Vaultier put her name on my hands. Bury me if you have to. Do not let them crown a thief with what I made." That was the line I would not cross. She could send me home. She could not let me be erased into someone else's story. There is a difference between being unseen and being unmade, and I had spent my whole life on the first to protect the people I loved. I was not going to survive the second. She came to me that night. Not to the office, not to the atelier, to my rented room, the one with the radiator that clanked and the window that looked out on nothing grand. 2 hours of her life she should not have spent, standing in my doorway out of the charcoal armor for the first time, in an ordinary coat, undefended, not still. And she told me everything, finally, in the flat, exact voice she used for the truest things. The whole architecture I had been reading wrong for 8 weeks laid open at last. "I saw your book in a pile of 200, she said, "a year ago, before you ever set foot in my building. I read it twice and I made one call, and that call is the only reason you have a job and your grandmother has a window." She did not stop. I tore it in that room because I had already decided I wanted you. And the moment my mother sees me want a thing, she takes it, to teach me again that I am not permitted to. "So I made you look like nothing, in front of everyone. It is the cruelest thing I have ever done, and I would do it again to keep you out of her hands. And I kept the fourth piece, because I am not the Frost they think I am. I am a woman who has kept exactly one soft thing in 20 years, and it is a torn-up drawing of a coat." Her voice finally cracked, one hairline fracture. Every time I said again, I meant keep going. I meant I see you. I meant it in the only language she could not overhear. "I am done being careful, Nell. I have been careful my whole life, and it has kept me perfectly, coldly, safely alone." I crossed the small, warm room to where she stood. I took her left wrist in my hand, the one with the platinum watch, the cold face of it under my fingers, the tell I had learned better than my own heartbeat, and I felt her pulse jump under my thumb, fast and certain, and telling the truth, her whole disciplined life had been built to hide. I did not say a word. I have made a life out of reading the true thing under the made thing, and there was nothing left to read. It was all on the surface now, all of it, the wanting and the fear and the 8 months of it. She lifted her other hand and set it against my jaw, careful, the way she was careful with everything she had decided mattered, and she pressed her forehead to mine and breathed me in like a woman coming up out of cold water. And when she finally closed the last inch of a perimeter we had held for 2 months, it was the softest thing that ferocious mouth had ever done. Once. Slow. Her hand at my jaw and mine at her wrist with her pulse going wild under it. And then the world we had been holding off came all the way in. And I have to leave you at the door of it. And this is where I have to stop. Because what happened next was never meant for YouTube. If you want the uncut version, it's waiting on my Patreon. The link is in the description. The show was 9 days later, and everyone with a name came. And they came expecting a wedding. That is the honest word for what Constance had sold them. The whole front row primed for the announcement, Meridian and Vaultier folding into one house, Simone Vaultier seated in the place of honor in Vaultier gray, the merger dressed up as a season. The collection was mine, every look of it, the oxblood running through it like a pulse, the bias seams moving like water, the coat, my coat, the one from the 4th page, rebuilt at last in the real cloth, closing the show. They did not know it was mine. They thought they were watching Meridian. They were watching me. And backstage, behind the wall of it, with my grandmother's shears in my hand doing the last cut on the last hem. I did not yet know what Sabine was going to do at that microphone, because she had not told me, because she had said only, "Trust me one more time and be ready to be seen." Constance rose to speak, and Simone arranged her gray to be looked at, and then Sabine took the microphone instead of her mother, which was not the plan, and the room felt the weather change. She pressed her thumb flat to the face of her watch. One last time, the old question, how long do I have to keep being careful? And then she did a thing I will love her for, until I am the one in the care home forgetting names. She unfastened the watch and set it down. She stopped being careful in front of 300 people, who had never once seen her be anything else. "This season is not Meridian's," she said, into a silence you could have cut with the good shears. "It is not mine, Every seam you have been applauding was made by one pair of hands, and I have spent 8 months hiding those hands, because I was raised to believe the surest way to destroy a thing is to be seen loving it." She looked toward the wall I stood behind. "I was taught wrong." Then she said my name into that room, the way she had said it, in a fitting room at 9 at night. The whole of it, like punctuation, like a claim. And she said, "Nell Beckett is the reason you are standing. Come out here. Let them see your hands." Constance was faster than her daughter had planned for. She was on her feet. She had the room half-turned with 3 cold words: a nobody, a fraud. The old erasure already reaching for me. And this is the part I am proudest of. Prouder even than the tears I did not cry the first day. I did not wait to be rescued. I walked out from behind the wall on my own, into that light I had earned in the dark, with my grandmother's bone handle shears still in one hand, and in the other, the sketchbook, the real one, the 4 taped pieces, dated in my own hand months before the season. The room had been applauding. I held it up. "This is mine," I said, and my voice did not shake, because I had learned stillness from a woman forgetting my name, and precision from a woman who had loved me sideways for a year. I made this. "She tore it up in this house to keep me safe from you," I said, to Constance, to the whole front row, and I am done being kept safe by disappearing. My name is Nell Beckett. These are my hands, and you have all been on your feet for an hour, applauding them. I claimed my own work before anyone could claim it for me, and only then, when the room already knew whose the season was, did Sabine come down off that stage and take my hand in front of every camera in the city. Not to save me, I had already done that, but to stand beside a thing she was finally allowed to be seen loving. You want to know what happened to them, so I will tell you quickly, because they do not get to have the end of this story. They only get the middle. Simone Vautier's gray went home empty. A merger built on a lie does not survive the lie coming out, and the Vautier name went looking for a house less complicated to marry. Constance Laurent learned the thing she had spent a lifetime refusing to learn, which is that a house is not made safer by keeping it dead. Meridian, with my name finally on the season, sold better and mattered more than it had in a decade, and the proof of her whole cold philosophy came apart in her hands, in the one language she could not argue with, which was the numbers. She did not soften. Women like Constance do not soften. They recalculate. But she recalculated her daughter out of the dark she had kept her in for 40 years. Because even Constance could see that the frost had finally made something warm, and the something was worth more than the cold had ever been. That is as much of an ending as she gets. The rest of it is ours. My grandmother had a good day the week we drove up to tell her. Some days the pale green room gave her back to me, and that was one of them. She knew my name. She knew her own. She knew the shears the second I put them in her hands, older than both of us, worn pale as a river stone. She looked at Sabine a long time with the clear eyes she only had on the good days, and then she looked at me, and she said, in the voice that raised me, "So this is the one they tried to make you small for." And I said yes, and my grandmother, who taught me that cloth is honest, and a word is a thing you keep, patted the back of Sabine's careful hand with her ruined ones and said, "Keep your shears sharp, and your words sharper." And Sabine Laurent, the frost of Meridian, who had never in my sight taken an instruction from anyone, said quietly, "Yes, ma'am," and meant it. A seam does not lie about the hands that made it. I had spent a whole year learning that a person is the same, that under the made thing, the frost, the cruelty, the 8 months distance, there is a true seam, and if you know how to read it, it tells you everything the surface was built to deny. We live small, still, on purpose. She could have moved us into the top of the gray building, and she did not. We have a real apartment now, but it is a human size, with a window that gets north light in the morning, because I told her once what that light had meant to me at 6 in the morning in a house that thought I was furniture, and she found us rooms that had it and never said why. Her platinum watch lives on my nightstand 3 nights a week. She still lets her coffee go cold. She is still funny in the blue hours in a way the world will never get to meet, and she still cannot smile like a normal person. She does the almost smile, the one I spent weeks learning to read. And I have decided it is the best thing in my life to be one of 2 people on earth who knows what it means. Some nights I sew at the kitchen table with my grandmother's shears while she works beside me. The Frost and her Muse, 2 careful people who spent a whole year holding a perimeter and then spent the rest of their lives being glad they finally crossed it. The other night I finished a small thing, a private thing, a coat for no one but myself. And I set the shears down and looked up and found her already watching me the way she watched me that first morning at my window with the toil turned inside out in her hands, reading my seams, reading the true work, the loved work, the part the outside is built to hide. I turned the coat inside out and showed her the inside, the way you only show the maker. And she took off her glasses to truly look, and she pressed her thumb once to the empty place on her wrist where the watch used to live when she still needed to ask how long she had to be careful. She does not need to ask anymore. She looked at the seam I had made, the honest one, and then she looked at me, and she said the only word that was ever the truth between us, the one that took me 8 months and a runway to learn the meaning of, the one that means keep going and I see you and do that again, and stay, all at once, forever. Again, she said. So I did.